Hey guys, it's Chala Dinkoy, CEO and founder of The Repositioning Expert. Welcome to another Tuesday Tea Time with Chala. I am in glasses again today. I just had my eye scraped, my eyeball scraped, this one. And yeah, no makeup and glasses for a couple of days. I all of a sudden woke up with pain in my eye when I was sleeping, and it was like a jetting pain, like a jagged pain. And then the doctor said that it had been scratched, and she said there was like this layer that was like looping on top. It was disgusting. And she was like, she froze the eyeball. She had to like scrape it off, and to manage the pain, so she put a bandage lens on it. So there's like a lens in this one, and I have to keep putting antibiotic drops. Lovely. It is completely very apt for the topic that we have today. The topic that I'm going to talk about is voluntary suffering in your sales and marketing versus involuntary suffering. And I got the idea from a really great personal trainer. You guys know that I'm big into personal training, into fitness. I have my own fitness shoots and blogs and everything like that. So I saw this really great video by one of the trainers that I follow, and he was talking about voluntary suffering in fitness. Because for some people, exercising truly is suffering. Just like for some people, marketing and selling truly is suffering. And then he made the point about why is it, like, what is true suffering versus, voluntary suffering versus involuntary suffering. And how apt that, my eye is suffering. I'm suffering because my eye is suffering. And I didn't even know that my eye was suffering when I wrote this. So here is, you may have heard of Dan Pink. In his book, To Sell is Human, he asked for the first word that comes to mind of these interview subjects when he said the word selling or sale. And here are the words that people came up with: pushy, hard, yucky, sleazy, annoying, slimy, and dishonest. So if you could see a word map, this is what they had. And when they counted all the words that were said about sales and selling, 80% of them were negative. So that you know that if you have to be in the position, if you have your own business, and you have to be in the position of selling and marketing, that's how you feel. And for some people, it feels like suffering. So let me just take you back to, and I'm going to liken this to what the personal trainer was saying about voluntary suffering versus involuntary suffering. And then I'm going to make a comparison to suffering in your business, voluntary suffering for your sales and marketing versus involuntary suffering. So in fitness, the voluntary suffering is literally getting out of your warm bed to go out into the cold air and do a workout. Even if it's just in your own home, it's still warmer in bed. And so that's suffering. Lifting heavy weights, something that I force myself to do. That's, for some people, it's suffering. For other people, when they get to the point that I am, it's a relief. It's like part of your life. It's an addiction. But until you get there, and for some people, how they've positioned it in their minds and what they link it to is true suffering. Running and walking for some people is suffering. And I'm not talking about like if they're physically unable to, because of their health, unable to do it, then to do it, and that's suffering. No, it's for regular people who just hate running and walking. And then not watching the show that you're addicted to, maybe on Netflix or Prime, instead of exercising. So letting go of something you love more to be able to do that for that period of time is suffering. Not eating, this one hurts. Not eating as many of your favorite foods as you want, that you normally do, that's a form of suffering. So you have to mentally make the decision, am I going to do voluntary suffering or involuntary? So here is what the involuntary suffering that you do if you don't do the voluntary suffering for fitness. You can't play or run with your kids because you're so out of shape. You don't fit your clothes. I mean, I've recently gained a couple of pounds, and I'm suffering because I hate the way my clothes look on me, and some of my favorite stuff I don't fit. It doesn't feel comfortable. Avoid activities and friends. There are some statistics that Dove has done around how women refuse to be photographed, refuse to be in a bathing suit, they refuse to go into a pool or to a party, all because of the way they look. There's people who hate themselves, and I have done this. I have been this person. They hate themselves or their life. So this is all suffering, and this is involuntary suffering. Nobody volunteers to do that. Being out of breath, that's really, really hard. That's suffering. Having bad health. And I just came from a doctor's office. Doctor's offices, waiting, taking their pills, taking their tests, that's suffering. So you can take in fitness the involuntary suffering and compare it to the voluntary suffering, and you will always, always be better off with the voluntary suffering. One, because it's voluntary. You know that you're choosing to do this for your betterment. And two, because you can choose the lesser of all evils. One of the things that trainers always say is to start with something you hate the least. And that's what I'm going to tell you in your marketing. So, and your sales. So let me take it now to what voluntary suffering is in business, which is in your sales and marketing. Paying money to someone like me to help you figure out what to do for your sales and marketing. That to me is voluntary suffering, because a lot of people think they can figure it out on their own, but yet they suffer afterwards because none of it is working. But voluntary suffering is taking the hit, getting the money from somewhere, borrowing it, or putting it into the business as an expense and seeing it as an investment to pay for the strategy of figuring out what you do. It's just the first thing that came to mind when I thought about voluntary suffering. And for some people, spending money on their business truly is suffering, because they're in the mindset of lack, and all they see is putting money out and not being able to see it come back. But I know that I've retrained my whole mindset around that, because I was able to do that during COVID when I lost all my funnels and the conferences got canceled and all the borders got closed, and I was able to invest my brains out when I had no money left in the bank and no clients coming in and no prospects and no funnels. I still invested because I've done so much work on my mindset. So voluntary suffering, I was voluntarily suffering and paying money that I didn't have to coaches to help me reconfigure my business, and now I'm doing so much better. Voluntary suffering for your marketing is getting in front of a camera just like this. Let me tell you, my eye is hurting me. I need to put more drops in it. I was at a doctor's. I ran back home and did a podcast while still it's hurting. I'm blinking. This is not fun. It's voluntary suffering. But I do it because I have committed to the voluntary suffering of the marketing and sales for my business. And the funny thing is, the more you do the things that you don't want to do, the more you get used to them, and then you start to enjoy them, right? Maybe some people never do and never will, but it doesn't matter. I still want you to start by looking at it as voluntary versus involuntary, because when we talk about the involuntary suffering of not doing the things you need to do, they're much, much more horrible. Picking up the phone, you guys. I have a group coaching program, and it's a semi-private, it's very small, and what we talk about all the time is how come they can't pick up the phone, how come they're still in resistance. How come? And these are calling people they know. That's voluntary suffering, is when you pick up the phone and you know you don't want to. And then here's true suffering, is getting rejected. When you do pick up the phone, when you do call, when you do text, when you do email. Rejection is suffering. I'm not going to tell you any differently, but it's voluntary, because from last week when I talked about it's only 19% of sales that get a yes. So almost 8 out of every 10 person that you ask to work with you say, no, thank you. That is rejection. That's painful, but that's voluntary suffering. And if you're not willing to do that, the statistics are there. You're not going to get the 2 to close if you don't say you're not ready to hear the 8 that don't. And of course, get up each and every day and write some piece of content. Write, record, I don't care. This is voluntary suffering for a lot of people, and they refuse to do it. They just defer it, they defer it, they defer it. It's too painful. But content is what helps people who need you. It's what reaches them, it's what educates them, it's what tells them who you are, what you can do for them, how you can help them, and what you know. And if you're not willing to get up every single day and write one piece of content, or every single week and put out some form of something to help the people that you're trying to sell to, then you're not going to get their business, you're not going to get in front of their eyeballs, and that's you have to do voluntary suffering. Okay, so then you've got the voluntary suffering part for the sales and marketing. Now, what about involuntary suffering? Well, the involuntary part is when you don't do any of those things, this is what happens. You can't afford to live in good neighborhoods. You live in unsafe neighborhoods. You live in neighborhoods that don't have great schools, and your kids are going to school with other children who are not maybe in the best situation. Here's something that happens a lot is your car is breaking down. Now, I've been so fortunate to be able to drive, like renew my car from scratch every year, and they're usually luxury brands. I've never had car issues, never. And yet I have friends who don't make as much money as me, and they're always having car issue. And the reason for that is because their cars are old, or they're, lower brands. These are involuntary suffering. How do you think they feel when they feel so unsafe on the highway in the middle of the night when their car breaks down? Involuntary suffering, because you refuse to do the voluntary suffering, is you depend on and you have to put up with a spouse who's not supportive of your business and who has to pay for you and whatever you're doing. I have that in one of my clients, and they're suffering. They're suffering. Now, luckily, they're doing they've paid me so that they've done the voluntary suffering so that they can figure out how to make the money on their own, and they're quickly getting there. And what's amazing is that the spouse is becoming less, aggravating in their mind, because they can see that they're already getting there. Here's more involuntary suffering for your business if you don't volunteer to suffer in the ways that you need to for your marketing and sales, is you can't afford food you want. T. Harv Eker talks about this a lot when in his Millionaire Mindset, is that when you go to a restaurant, now you can't go to restaurants either, but you're doing takeout, or when you're going to the grocery store, is you're getting chicken versus steak. He always talks about the chicken versus steak. So look at what you're eating, look at what you're ordering. If you're always ordering the cheaper, or pasta, that's involuntary suffering. You can't go on vacations. I know you can't go on vacations now, but think about before and think about after. I used to go on 3 vacations, and people were almost telling me, that's like the 3rd time this year, isn't it? And they were literally berating me for it, because I, at the time, had surrounded myself with people in the same middle class, and they simply couldn't understand why anybody would go on vacation 3 times a year to Jamaica. But that's a form of suffering when I live in Toronto. It's cold, you guys. It's feels like minus 14 Celsius right now. I don't know what in the US that feels like, but let me tell you, it's not Jamaica. So it's great to be able to get it, and it is involuntary suffering to have to stay here. Buying gifts for your family, one of the things that I do in my visualizations all the time, and at a smaller limit, I'm still gifting my family and my friends with things that I can afford, but at the larger levels, like my parents go to Turkey they're snowbirds, so they live in Montreal, but they vacation, they winter in a warmer climate, which is where they were born, in Turkey. And I had this vision, and lately they've been going to the south, which is in the Mediterranean. They've been renting a place in Antalya because their home was being rebuilt in Istanbul. But all that to say is, I actually did that trip last February, just before COVID. It was like being packed like sardines and for 15 hours. And these people are in their 80s. And I had the vision of giving them a full, business class, that bed, situation in the plane. And that's what I was going to work towards this in 2020, and then COVID hit. So that's still a vision. That's what I want to give to them. Of course, they can't go there now, but when they do, I want to be in the position to be able to purchase them full, whatever, first class tickets where they can lie down for 15 hours instead of being packed like sardines. So that's involuntary suffering for me to know that they're suffering in sardine-like conditions in economy. And then of course you send your kids to good schools. I just renewed Logan's new year, and the prices have gone up, and it's a private school, and they were already high to begin with, and I'm able to afford that. And what are you able to afford? Because you're doing the involuntary suffering of getting on cameras, of producing content, of picking up the phone, of actually selling and marketing. So I hope this, kind of soapbox tirade was useful to you guys, and it kindles some thoughts and ideas, and some hope and courage for you to do the voluntary suffering around your business. All right, signing off. I'm gonna go and put some drops in my eye, and hopefully it's gonna be okay. I'll see you here next week, guys. Happy tea time.